On today's journey, we are headed back up to Fredericksburg, Virginia, to finish our conversation with Ariel. And we just barely we didn't even scratch the surface the last time. And, Ariel has such an array of expertise, experience. We were just talking, and, she's been in the military world. She's been in the sport dog world. She's come back and trained dogs in the police field with Jerry and Mike. She's sat through numerous seminars and training sessions, and she's even, went to the companion field, with the pets. So she has got about all of our bases covered, and now she's in the hound world and brings a wealth of knowledge and experience with her into the field that all of our listeners love. I mean, that's what drives us, is being with the hounds. And it doesn't matter whether it's a coon hound or a bear hound or a lion hound or a fox hound, coyote. We all do the same things. We all enjoy our dogs, and we use our dogs to capture the game or the quarry that we're after. So today, I think Ariel and I is going to break down to two topics. There's a lot more that we would love to discuss, but today, just to simplify things down, I'm gonna ask her just a few questions. And remember, guys, she's got a degree in biology and a minor in neuroscience. And neuroscience kind of breaks down to the olfactory system, which in the police world, that talks about, that's how the nose works. So we're going to dig a little deeper into that and talk about some scientific stuff and, what drives the dog, how to stimulate the dog. That's going to be the second half. So, Ariel, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back again. I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation from last time.
I'm telling you, I mean, it's a pleasure. Like I said, I know that you and I have talked many, many times, and, just to have your expertise. And like you said on the last podcast, we both speak the same language when it comes to the working police sport dog side of it, and being able to have those conversations with somebody that can speak that language is invaluable to me. Even though I know you're getting started, I guarantee you're leaps and bounds ahead of some of us with your experience. So let's just break it down. I know we kind of left off last time with a few things. With your experience, Ariel, and we can talk about the actual training of the hound itself. What are some things that you have taken from your experience in all four of those fields, and what are some things that you have brought over to the hound world?
Okay. Well, we had touched upon it, I think, at the very end of our conversation last time, but starting, I guess, from the simplest thing with puppies, just how to raise a nice dog to live with. My dogs, I don't have a big piece of property in the country, so my dogs spend a lot of the time in crates in the house, or even when they're in the yard. We're in close proximity to the neighbors, so and I take them for walks. I want to have a dog that's reasonably well behaved. So just having the obedience background has helped me to kind of know that line between having a dog that is a working dog. Their purpose in being in my life is to work and go out and hunt. So I don't want to put so much control on them that it inhibits them, but I want to be able to have enough control that I can lead them through the woods. They're not dragging me down the trails and knocking me down. And I want to have a dog that'll come back to me. That's one of the frustrations I've felt pretty early on in my experience with hunting dogs, is when you have a dog out there that is not ready to come back, and you wind up wasting a lot of time trying to chase that dog down. So one of the earliest things I do with my puppies is to teach them to come back to both my voice, verbal recall when I call their name, or, give them some sort of verbal signal from me, or the tone on the collar. So as long as they know where I am in proximity to their location in the woods, I can use the tone, and I don't have to worry about yelling loud enough for them to hear. They understand tone means come back and find me. And I start that very young. Beyond that, my detection background and my tracking background, I've trained human tracking dogs. I've been able to incorporate my knowledge of that into training the hounds to hunt game. As we discussed last time, it's not a one-for-one transfer of knowledge. I can't do things exactly the same, but I do think having that knowledge base has allowed me to figure things out probably a little bit more quickly than I would have had I not had that knowledge. And just the behavior between the dogs, kind of managing their interactions, making sure we have a good pack dynamic, not allowing them to be reactive in situations that it's inappropriate. So that understanding of general dog behavior, I think, is just something that is always going to come in handy when you're working with dogs, being able to read their body language and know what they're going to do before they do it, so you can prevent them from learning bad habits.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the obedience side. And I know that some of the podcasts I've been on, I talk about a dog being able to handle. And, one of the things when I first got into canine, of course, now way back when, it was a compulsion. And just the demeanor of the dogs from back in the early 2000s to now, everything's in their face, in their eyes, and their ears. The ears are laid back. Eyes are a little bit bigger because you're forcing them to do something. But I was always told that if you put obedience on them, you break their spirit. And I don't believe that. I mean, then I didn't know any better. That's what I was being told. That's what was being told to me continuously, and that's what I regurgitated because that's what I thought. Mm-hmm. I mean, how do you feel about how about it? Because I hear a lot of guys in the hound world, they talk about that. They talk about, they don't want to diminish their drive. They don't want to diminish their drive, and they're not saying those exact words. Those are my words, but
yeah. So I certainly mean this with the utmost respect to all the hunters out there. They know a great deal more about hunting hounds than I do, but I do notice that a lot of times that opinion and that perspective comes from people who use obedience to suppress behavior, and they use a lot of pressure, and they to put a handle on the dog, they use a lot of compulsion, like you mentioned, and this is prevalent across all dog venues. It's not just hunting,
mm-hmm.
But speaking to why that opinion may persist. Yes, if you take a young dog and you're constantly telling them no and making them uncomfortable for being happy and excited, and they get too excited and you correct them, you are going to suppress that dog's drive and make them you're going to inhibit them and make them afraid to be too independent potentially, or to act too excited about something. So when I'm teaching a young dog obedience, I have certain things that I don't accept. I don't want a dog that's jumping all over me. So mm-hmm. I will punish that behavior and not think anything of it. If you're jumping on me, if you're mouthing me too hard, if you're doing things that are dangerous or to me or to another dog, or, just making it difficult to interact with you, I will punish that. But when it comes to teaching the dog to come back to me or to walk on a leash, I can do that by creating positive associations with things. If you stay near me, you get good things. If you come back to me when you hear this noise or when I call your name, You get a handful of kibble, or you get a treat, or, you know, I rub you on the head. Whatever motivates that dog is what I use. So obedience does not always have to be inhibitive and does not always have to suppress the dog's drive. You just have to be careful how you use it. And, you know, you have to think about cause and effect. If the dog runs away from you and you yell at them, and then when you get them back to you, you beat them, that dog's not going to want to come back to you, and they are going to be inhibited. They're going to be, when they're near you, they're going to be nervous. So I want to create positive associations. And then, you know, if the dog does something that I dislike, I will punish it fairly, keeping in mind the dog's age and maturity level and how sensitive they are.
Yeah. I mean, yes. And can you give it, well, you did give us a quick example. I mean, and you said the same thing that I say all the time. Most of the time, my motivator is the food, especially for a hound and a younger dog. They're most of the time that the hound, especially, the food works wonderfully. And, you know, I've learned so many lessons with patience and doing things that way, and not using the compulsion. And like I said, I'm guilty. I've chased dogs around my yard and the neighborhood and around the woods. And when I got my hounds on them, I give them a good what for. And then, you know, next time I tried to catch them, they was like, you know, I remember last time, this was not a good thing. So yeah, I'm with you. And it's still hard. Like, you know, when you're trying to grab a dog and get to another location, or, you know, pick a dog up and get out of a dangerous situation, road crossing or whatever. Sometimes our emotions, our tempers, however you want to put it, do get a hold of us. And I have to remind myself a lot that it's, you know, the dog is not the problem. Most of the time it's me.
Oh, I mean, none of us are perfect. And, you know, like you said, it's hard, especially, you know, when a lot of times you've got a handful of hounds. It's not just one or two dogs at a time. You've got 5 or 6, and, you know, you've got one that doesn't want to get in the box, and you've got another one that doesn't want to come to you. And like you said, you're trying to load up dogs and get them down the road. Sometimes they're not going to have the best experience. So I try and counteract that by, okay, you know, if the dog's a little nervous about getting in the box, let me feed him in there for a few days or a week. Let me practice having him jump up and jump down. My blue dogs hated to load up into the crate when I first got them. And there was definitely times where I'm in a rush and I'm frustrated and I'm like, I'm just going to pick you up and throw you in there. But I also spent a lot of time rewarding them for going in, teaching them to wait, rewarding them for coming out when I tell them to. So now they both load up on their own, and they wait when I open the door. But, you know, I had to remember that I'm not always going to be perfect, especially in the heat of the moment. So let me take opportunities when things are calm and I'm at home to practice the behaviors that I'm going to need when I'm out in the field, quote unquote.
Yeah. And I do that a lot in the off season, like you just said, when it's not so stressful and everything I do. And I do I feed my young dogs. I feed them on the tailgate, and then I move them to the back of the truck, and then I put my dog box on, and I leave the dog box open, and then I feed them inside the dog box. And, you know, then and it doesn't really take that long. Maybe the whole process is 2 weeks, maybe not. But yeah, and it saves a lot of trouble. And once they think there's food in the back of that truck, they usually don't have no problem knocking the back out of the box. That's for sure.
Yep. And, you know, it's nice because those behaviors persist. So even if you don't practice it for a while, they're hopeful. They're like, oh, I'll jump up here and maybe I'll get a treat this time.
Yeah. The word hope in dog training is huge.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, no, I'm with you. And you talked about toning, and I know that there's probably a lot of people talk about this. So when you start your puppies with the tone, give me a real quick rundown of that process. What do you associate with? Yeah, how do you associate the tone with the comeback? Let's go over that.
Sure. I've actually been trying to make some videos of this. So what I first do, because, you know, putting the collar on the dog and pressing the tone button can be scary for some dogs. If they don't know where that noise is coming from, they've never heard it before, it can be unsettling. So the first couple times they hear it, maybe the first couple sessions, I just hold the collar in my hand and do I just create a positive association. I'm doing, Pavlovian conditioning. I don't care what the dog does. I beep the tone on the collar, feed him some food. Beep the tone on the collar, feed him some food.
Okay. Now, is the collar on the dog or in your hand?
Nope, it's in my hand at this point.
All right, it's off the dog.
I just want that first instance of them hearing that noise. A lot of times when you put the collar on the dog, they wind up turning around and trying to look and see where it's coming from. So, to avoid that confusion, I just hold it in my hand. And if I have a dog that I think is a little nervous, I'll even kind of hold it behind my back. But all I want to do is create that temporal association where they hear the noise and they get the food and they start to think to themselves, oh, that noise means food is coming. Mm-hmm. Just like, the old can opener, the dog hears the can opener, or the rustling of the bag of treats, and they come running because they know what that means. Yep. I want that tone to have that same value to them. Like, oh, tone equals food.
Yep.
Once I'm getting, I'm not getting any kind of startle or nervous response, then I'll put the collar on the dog. I keep a leash on them at this point because I don't want there to be a what if. I don't want to hit the tone and the dog goes running the other direction and gets scared and runs under the porch or, something crazy. I want to be able to control the variables like we talked about last time. I like to control. So put a leash on the dog, press tone, kind of gently reel the dog towards me with the leash, give them food. And it also helps if you're kind of backing away from them because they naturally want to follow you.
Come to that prey, yeah.
Yep. Tone, I kind of back up quickly and make myself look exciting, give them food. Tone, back up, food. Tone, food. So now, I'm kind of reeling them into me, backing up, teaching them you have to move towards me in order to get what you want. And then just gradually, I have leashes of different lengths. And once I see it kind of starting to click where before I even start reeling them in, they're moving towards me, then I stop helping them so much. I won't back up. I won't make myself as exciting. I won't pull on the leash as much. I wait for the dog to give me the effort. So they hear tone, they make the effort to move towards me. And as they're doing that, I'll say, good dog. I'll clap my hands. I want them to understand like, hey, you're making the right choice here. You heard the tone. You're coming to me. Before they even get to me, I can celebrate their good choices. And then when they get to me, they get the food. And then that just transitions into taking them into environments that are more distracting, having them around the other dogs, taking the leash off eventually. I usually go from that, like the leash to my backyard where they can't totally run away. But there's no leash attached to them. And I mean, it goes really quickly. Within a couple days, if not, a couple sessions, the dog is like, ooh, that noise means I get food. And I maintain that. People always say like, well, when can I stop rewarding my dog? Well, you go to work and you expect your paycheck every 2 weeks. So, I practice this. I have some treats in my pocket when I go out in the yard or when I'm, we're out on the trails and they're not really hunting anything, just to remind them like, there's the chance, again, the hope, that there's something good waiting for you when you come back. And if I don't have treats, I praise them and let them know they're good dogs for coming back to me.
Yeah. The verbal praise is important for a dog, and it does work. It's not, it's not the highest reward system, but it does work. And most dogs are tactile too. I mean, they like you to pet them and love on them. And if anybody's ever hunted with me, been in my truck, in my back doors, in my pockets of my back doors on both sides, I have small bags of the food that I do my stuff with. It's really big kibble. And I even do that when I'm out in the woods if I can think about it. Mm-hmm. Like if my dogs are coming and they've been out for a while, I reach down there and I get me a handful of it, and when they get back to me, boom, they get it. So I'm trying to reinforce that, just like what you said. I try to reinforce it as much as I can.
Yep. And I know, I've had people say like, well, aren't you worried they're not going to want to go hunt because you have food? I'm like, if I've got a dog that, now as puppies, yeah, food is more important. But if I've got, a 10-month-old, a year-old dog that doesn't want to go hunt because I've got a couple kibbles, then maybe that's not the right dog for the job. Generally, the prey and the hunt or the work is, and the reward of the work is more desirable than what I'm giving them for coming back to me. But I can still give them some tangible reward.
Yeah, I don't, if a hound's programmed right, that's not even that's not even a concern. Like, I wouldn't even cross my mind. I mean, you've never tried to hold,
it's never been,
you've never tried to hold a dog back trying to get out of the box and off the tailgate because they smelt a hot bear.
Yeah, I haven't run into it being an issue yet. So
no, absolutely not. Well, good. I mean, that's a good starter. And like I said, you actually do it just a little bit different than I do. So good. I mean, I learned something right there. So with your biology degree and with your extensive knowledge in the detection world and the tracking, I want to flip over to the neuroscience, the olfactory system, which is the system that the dog uses to process odor, scent. It runs through his nose. And I mean, if I could show you a picture of what this looks like with all the nerve endings and all the stuff in the dog's nose, I mean, it's unbelievable. And one of the things that when I teach my detection classes, well, even the tracking classes, that I've got a small video, and it's kind of like a cartoon, but it shows a picture of that the dog sees the world through his nose. And yes, they do use their eyes, but their nose is their point. That's where they get most of their information. They do see, they do hear, but that's where they probably process the majority of their information. Is that an accurate statement, Ariel?
Yep. Is it the TED Talk video with the dog kind of seeing the flowers?
Yes, and and they show him walking down the sidewalk, and he's sniffing on the fire hydrant, and this dog's telling a story. Hey,
I think that's a great video.
I mean, I use it, and I show it to all my guys, and it's kind of a little corny, but it really paints a visual of what the dog is processing and what he's living through. He was able to tell that the two kids walked down through there and spit gum out. And, that's one of the things that drew me into hunting is the very first time I was out with hounds and we were walking through the woods, and I've hunted my whole life. And we walk down into this hollow, and we start up on the side of the ridge, and the dogs just explode. And I don't know what's going on. And I'm asking the guy that I'm with, hey, and he's like, oh, well, that's where the bear went, and yada, yada, yada. And that's one thing that is always, even sometimes when I'm out and my dogs start trailing, like knowing this dog is telling me a story. It looks like leaves and dirt and grass and rocks to me. And this dog is picking up an odor and telling me where this animal traveled. And the more I get to know my dog, I can tell you, you can gauge, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. We can gauge like, okay, that animal's through here a couple hours ago, or maybe that was a last night feed track. Without that dog telling the story, we wouldn't know. And I mean, that's one of the things that really drew me into the hound world is the dog, and the dog painting that picture for me. I just thought it was awesome. And like I said, 27 years later, here I sit. But that's what grabbed me, and that's what I was thinking at the time is, okay, there's been a bear through here, and I had no clue. I would have never known if that dog wasn't there barking. And that's kind of how I seen it. All right, so let's talk about. All right, let's tell us. All right, enlighten us here on the neuroscience and how the dog processes odor, the things that he uses, and what maybe we can do to enhance that. And I know that's a long one, but the floor is yours.
So just real quick, my background. My undergraduate research advisor was really interested in the olfactory bulb of rats and mice. So a lot of my undergraduate research centered on olfaction, and I tied it into a lot of mental processes because of the neuroscience. But what's nice is what's applicable in rats and mice is also applicable in humans and dogs. There are differences in sizes of things. You know, dogs have way more scent receptors than humans, and they have a bigger olfactory bulb, but we generally have the same parts. So you can, for the most part, interchangeably talk about the different parts of the nose and the brain between mice and rats and humans and dogs, and study different organisms and know how they all work for the most part. Don't take that as a blanket statement. I haven't studied every organism extensively, but I think what I'm about to say is a pretty good overview. So I think just, science is fun to talk about and interesting to understand, but I think what's important is how can we apply what we know about the anatomy and physiology and neurophysiology of odor, olfaction, and the nose, and make that work for us in training dogs. So I think when we first talk about the anatomy of the dog's nose, you look at their nostrils, and they have two little slits on the outside of their nostrils, and their noses don't work the same as ours do. So when they breathe in, the air goes through the larger part that's more towards the center of their nostril as they're breathing in. Just about simultaneously, they can also be breathing out of those two little slits on the sides of their nose. Mm-hmm. And the air that's coming out actually swirls and will help swirl up odors that are on the ground that will then be sucked in as they're breathing in. So that real simple anatomy of their nose helps them smell better and interact with the odors in their environment better. Things that I think would be important to take home is the moisture in their nose and inside their nasal cavity helps the odor molecules stick to it and thus bind with the scent receptors in the dog's nose. So if you're hunting in a really dry environment, if your dog has been without water for a long time, a lot of times they're not interested in drinking. But what I'll do is I'll take some water in my hand and just kind of almost shove it up their nose. You're not going to drown them. I'm not like pouring a gallon of water up their nose, but just a little pool of water in my hand, and I'll kind of splash it in their nose up, and press it up against their nose to try and get them to kind of inhale a little bit of that water, and keep the nasal epithelium, the skin inside their nose, moist.
And we see our dogs a lot of times. If you pay attention, you see your dogs licking their nose constantly, especially mm-hmm. when they're trailing. Yep.
And so then moving into the interior of their nose, that also comes into play. So the inside of their nose is kind of generally separated into three chambers. There's the chamber where the air they're breathing goes. So that goes down into their lungs. There's the vomeronasal organ, or the Jacobson's organ. Might be Jacobs. I know it's vomeronasal. So that's kind of like on the roof of their mouth. And a lot of times when you see dogs like licking something and chattering or licking their nose, that actually allows them to basically taste the odor. It's not known exactly what odors are processed by that. They're pretty sure it's like pheromones and non-airborne odors. But it could also be related to the animals that they're tracking. So if they're tracking bears or raccoons, they can actually smell or process the non-airborne chemicals that are left behind with the animal's scent. And then above the vomeronasal organ and the respiratory chamber is the scent receptor chamber, essentially, where the air goes and binds with scent receptors, nasal epithelium, and that is where the information is sent to their brain. So, keeping that air moist is going to help them potentially taste different chemicals in that's left behind by the animals, and then also allow them to smell it and bind with the scent receptors. Then beyond that, I think this is just an interesting kind of tidbit that we can talk into how it plays into training. Olfactory information, so our smell information, is the only sense that doesn't go through the thalamus. So if you think of your brain as, a bunch of different airports, let's say, and the plane takes off, and instead of having to stop in the thalamus, which would be kind of the, a layover, it's a one-way straight to the part of the brain that processes memory and emotional information. So I know it's really big for me. I don't know. I think other people experience this as well, but I can smell something. There's some smell that whenever I smell it, I think of preschool. And I can't tell you anything else about preschool, but there's some food smell that I'll smell every now and again, and it'll bring me right back there. And that's because, our scent information is the one sense that doesn't have to kind of stop over and be routed elsewhere. It goes direct to the parts of our brain that are associated with memory, emotion, spatial processing. So when dogs create associations with odor, it's a lot more instant than the other things that we teach them. So I think when I'm thinking about that, I think when I create associations with odors, if I introduce a puppy to maybe a live coon too young, and it smells that raccoon and it has a bad experience with it going after, or you were talking about sometimes letting young dogs loose on bears. Not only could it have a bad experience with the animal itself, but all of the scent information that it has gathered about that animal can be very strongly associated with a bad emotional response. Am I explaining that clearly enough? I'm trying not to be too sciencey.
No, so you're saying that, and we all know. I mean, we all know that we walk in or smell something that takes us back to our childhood, or takes us back, into our granny's kitchen, or we have all these vivid memories. And when you smell something, it's all like an instant. It's instant. It's like, oh wow, I feel like I'm right back, in my grandma's kitchen. I mean, so what you're telling us is that through scent, there is no process. It goes in, and it automatically links to your memory, your emotions, and so forth. Correct?
Yeah. So there's always going to be processing going on, but it's a much more direct linkage versus having to be routed through the thalamus and kind of stopping off and taking a break there.
And you said something earlier that I wanted to go back and touch on. You was talking about the dogs chattering their teeth. And we've all seen it. The dogs are, they'll take their teeth and, and you're saying that what they're doing is they're literally tasting the odor.
Yeah. Yep. And I don't know if you're familiar with horses.
Yes.
Or cows do it where they like lift their top lip up really high and kind of wiggle it in the air. They actually have a more pronounced response. Whereas the dogs will kind of lick and chatter. They don't tend to do the big wiggly nose thing that horses do. Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's all very interesting. And we all talk, I know we're going to get to this talking about positive experiences with younger dogs and how it affects them throughout their training and whether they're productive or not. But tell us what is so interesting about the scent receptors as the dog goes from puppy to adulthood. What do they do that most people may not know?
Sure. So the scent receptors that an animal is born with are not the same ones that it dies with. So they regenerate over the course of an animal's life. How long the receptor, quote unquote, lives for varies, but an animal will have different scent receptors, and the distribution of those receptors will change throughout their lives. So one scent receptor is coded for one odorant. So where I think this is something that we can use is early life exposure to certain odors can cause an animal to have more of those scent receptors. And then continual exposure throughout the animal's life can help maintain the number of those receptors. Now, it's important to know that you can't just bask, the animal's cage in an odor, because there is something called habituation, where the body will actually downregulate the number. So like it's, I had a professor explain to me as like, you're putting a bunch of buckets out. If you're trying to collect rain and it's not raining very much, you need a lot of buckets to get the same amount of rain as if it was pouring and you only put one bucket out. So the body will change the number of buckets if it's always saturated with odor. Mm-hmm. But what I think is important is to have positive associations with an odor. So, as puppies, you can let them smell the odor before you give them their food. You can have a scented piece of hide that they play with, and it's associated with a fun game. I wouldn't just give them a piece of hide to sleep on for months at a time. Mm-hmm. I haven't read all the research on this topic, but I know I have a book actually called Canine Olfaction, Science and Law. And there's some studies in there that talk about odor pre-exposure in detection dogs. And they found that the ones that were just allowed to smell the odor and not have any association really didn't train up any easier. But the ones that had smelled the odor and were given food, and smelled the odor and were given food, actually learned the odor in a detection context faster. So, practically how I would apply this would be, I have a bowl for my puppies. It's one of those bowls where it's got kind of the trough around the outside and like a metal post in the middle. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I've drilled holes in that post, and I put the odor underneath. And I let them walk up to the bowl and smell the bowl, and then I pour their food in it. So they start to learn, I smell the odor, I get the food. I'm not asking them to do anything. I'm just trying to create that association and kind of generate that predisposition to have more scent receptors for the thing I want them to smell. And there's something, I'll pause in case you have any questions, but there's actually something even more interesting, I think, that having to do with the parents. How that affects. You
go ahead. I got a question, but okay. I can follow up when you're done.
This is pretty quick. So there's something called epigenetics. And basically it's how environmental exposure can turn genes on and off. And they've done research in rodents and found they expose the parent rodents to an odor and basically create a startle effect to that odor. And then not just their offspring, but their offspring's offspring. So 2 generations removed.
So they'd be their grandpups.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Will still startle when they smell this odor, even though they've had no exposure to it. And they've done it with like in vitro. So the mouse offspring weren't even around the parents, so they can't say it was a learned behavior. So if you have really good bear dogs and they have puppies, it's likely that their puppies will be more genetically programmed to hunt bear just because their parents did it, even without doing any sort of odor pre-exposure. Now, it's not been proven in detection dogs as far as I know, but it has been shown in rodents, and there's other epigenetic mechanisms that have been proven in humans and dogs and other organisms. So I feel like I would be confident to say, yeah, I think if I wanted good bear dogs, I would seek out puppies from dogs that are already good at hunting bears. just because it's probably likely that those puppies are going to have, some more scent receptors or some deep association between a scent and their behavior that will make them, give them a slight edge. I'm not saying they're going to be a shoo-in, but, given two equal puppies, they would probably have a slight advantage.
So that it would up your chances of having it would make your chances better in picking out of a litter that they're, and we all know that, you want to breed a bear dog to a bear dog, so you're saying that, okay, so, we bred Fancy and Spook, and we have our pups out here. They're 14 weeks old, and both of them run bear, and both of them tree their own bear. Fancy's weaknesses, Spook complements, and his weaknesses, she complements. And that was kind of our thought process. So you're saying that this litter of puppies, these 6 pups that we have, my chances are better of getting a bear dog because of their parents. And even though that she was actually hunted during her pregnancy. So is that going to make a difference in it?
I would say, now, obviously, nothing can be said with any certainty because I have not studied it, and, I don't know of research that exists. Mm-hmm. But based upon my understanding of epigenetics, I would say the puppies have a higher chance of having an affinity for bear odor. And I think that would be something that would be interesting to test. Someone that has numerous litters and maybe has dogs that they're breeding for one purpose or another. You can see puppies' affinity for different odors that they've never smelled before. Mm-hmm. But the mothers, so puppies get 50% of their genetic material from their father and 50% from their mother. But being in the mother's womb and her experiencing different things while she is carrying those puppies, different nutrition, different experiences, different stressors, has a greater effect on those puppies because there's the epigenetic influence that goes beyond just their concrete DNA genetics.
Right. So
hopefully I said that in a way that made sense.
No, I completely get it. And you're saying that if Fancy, I don't know, what could we use? So Fancy gets startled by, I don't know, let's say she runs out into a barn lot one night or one day while she's hunting, and 2 or 3 horses come around the barn and startle her. That odor would carry on to her pups.
I would say it would be more possible in her puppies than had she not had that experience. Now, you may have rock star puppies that just aren't startled by anything, but there is a chance that association, and again, like one trial learning, if she only experienced that one time, is that enough to flip that epigenetic switch? Mm-hmm. But say throughout her pregnancy, she was repeatedly exposed to something that was stressing her. And, like with the mice, for instance, I don't remember the names of the odors, but they exposed them to this odor and then shocked them, and exposed them to the odor and shocked them. So they had repeated instances of having a bad experience related to a particular odor. Mm-hmm. And then their offspring showed that same startle response to the odor that the parents had been shocked by. So I certainly don't want to put it out there like, oh yeah, if your dog has one bad experience with something, its puppies are going to be afraid of that forever. It's more of a consideration of, if you've got your female in a whelping room and she's constantly hearing a noise that's startling her, or there's a smell leaking into that room that is making her uncomfortable, you may see a response in those puppies to that same smell. Mm-hmm. Or that same noise. Yeah, because Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that's very interesting. And I mean, that's, again, it goes back to, knowing your dogs and knowing their behavior. And then you see that in the parent, and then, okay, then one of the pups does it, and then one of the pups does it. And you're like, oh yeah, that come. And I can actually, I see genetic things through the dogs that I have bred, in the line that I have bred for years, which I got from Lance Hutton. Some of the dogs do not take good to heat, and I have one here. He'll turn 8 in July, and his mother's mother, and her mother, all would in the early season, like August, September, or early August when it's hot. I mean, I couldn't hardly get anything out of her. And she'd lay down in mud puddles. I mean, if a bear crossed the road and she could get to water, she'd get to water and lay in it. I didn't have that problem in December. And it took me 3 generations to say, like, oh, wait a second. Racket done this. Abby done this. Little man's doing, like I see that trait. It's kind of what you're saying. I'm just seeing it in a different trait, but I get completely what you're saying.
Oh, and that, it spans more than just olfaction related traits. I am not a geneticist, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but, I understand the effects of epigenetics enough to know, if you see behaviors in a line, there's a likelihood that those behaviors are something that, especially if the puppies were raised by different people or raised in different ways, that you can say, well, you know what, that heat intolerance is something that line is carrying. And, trying to do your best to identify not just physical characteristics, but also behavioral characteristics that you can breed for.
Yeah.
I know we're going a little off topic, but I think it's still relevant.
It's still good. It's all good. All right. So talk to us a little bit about the nose. I know that the size of the nose matters, and why can you take 2 of the same dogs, 2 Walker dogs, blue ticks, black, I don't care what it is, black and tans, Chihuahua, I don't care. How can you take 2 dogs out of the same litter, and one of them has a desire to get down in cold trail, and the other one does not have the desire? If they all have the same receptors and everything's working. So talk to us a little bit about the nose and a theory on that.
Okay. Well, obviously you can look at a hound versus a bulldog. And I'm talking about, an English bulldog, a brachiocephalic dog that has the smushed face. And one is just better equipped genetically to do scent related tasks. A bigger nose, a wider nose, a longer nose, more surface area is going to allow that dog to take in more scent information and process it better. It's going to spend a longer time inside the nasal passage, interacting with more scent receptors. So, if I'm choosing a dog for a scent related task, I'm going to lean towards a dog that has a muzzle and a nose that's shaped better for what I want to do. Now that said, that doesn't mean that the dog is going to have the drive to do the job. So I can do everything right. I can pick a dog from 2 parents that were hunting dogs, and I can do scent exercises. I can pair odor with their food. I can have them searching for their food on the ground to build that desire to use their nose and hunt for something. But if the dog just doesn't want to do the work, they're going to take the easy route. Maybe if the animal is, a huge odor pool, and it's a hot track and there's just so much odor that it's easy for the dog, they might show the drive for it. I don't want to speak too much to hounds because, like I said, I'm still new at that, but I've seen plenty of detection dogs that if you put a large odor source that's easy for the dog to pinpoint. They don't have to work too hard. They can look decent, but when that odor is older, there's less of it. It's a more difficult scent picture for them to process. That dog might just say, it's just really not worth it to me. Whereas the dog that wants to work harder will be able to follow older scent in more challenging conditions, and will be able to follow that scent for longer distances. So in evaluating, when I'm picking puppies, I'm generally, if I'm looking at a litter of puppies of the same breed, I'm not usually like sitting there and measuring their noses. I'll throw some kibble on the ground and I'll see which puppies hunt for it the longest.
That's one of our tests. Yeah.
Because that to me shows like, do you know how to use your nose and are you willing to stick with it? Some puppies will go over and like eat the easy kibble that are quick to, they find quickly and they're easy, and then they get distracted by something. And then there's those one or two puppies that they will find every piece of kibble on the ground. And even after they've found every piece of kibble, they're still hunting in hopes that they're going to find one. I've found that simple test is a really good indication for me of how well a dog is going to use their nose. And then I feed my dogs off the ground a lot, or I'll go in my yard and I'll put out like little piles of food and have them actually go out and search for the food in my yard. Just to kind of lock in that behavior from an early age that if you use your nose, you're going to find good stuff, and just condition them to the way they interact with their environment first is through their nose, rather than visually.
Yeah, and if you
Does
guys
that answer the question?
Yeah, and if you guys look at go to Houndsman XP, the group, I posted a picture a couple days ago, exactly what Ariel's saying. I put out food on the ground, and I had the puppies in a different area. I literally walked in a different direction. And I had one of the females literally throw her head up in the air and went over and found the food. And she seems, and when I do I'm going to do an update on the pups, so I don't want to give everything away. But she went and found it, and when she found it, the whole pack went, and they all worked it for a good while. But you're exactly right. I've got some that stay with it longer, and some that don't. And I'm taking notes. Okay. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. So, and that stimulation too. I mean, they're having to work, they're working their nose. It's just like exercise for them. It's a good thing for pups. It's a very good thing for pups. So 2 dogs, same breed, same litter, and one wants to cold trail and one don't. Is that genetics? Is it training? Because I do think we can enhance some of the training if they have the desire, or is it both?
So let me ask you this. If you bake a cake and it's a really good cake, is it the ingredients or is it the chef that baked the cake and the way they baked it?
If I'm baking it, it's me.
No, you're taking the credit.
if everything lines up right, and then we're getting back to talking about genetics and how those chromosomes are lining up.
So I think it's a matter of, if you have a bunch of crappy ingredients, you're never going to have a good cake. And if you have a terrible chef, even with the best ingredients, you're never going to have a good cake. So you need, now if you have the best trainer and a dog that just naturally uses its nose and I think one of the interesting things I've learned about odor is they actually smell in stereo. So they can tell, like, if they're getting information from the right nostril or the left nostril, which way the scent is coming from. So I like to watch do the puppies learn? Are they just frantically searching, or are they actually, like, can I see them kind of working that odor directionally and finding the edges of the odor plume? So, I think you want to start with the best genetic specimen. But if you have bad training and, you know, your training is not aligned with what you want to accomplish, you're not going to have the product you want. Now, I think, I don't know how much time we have left, but a conversation Taylor and I have had is, you know, is the cold-nosed dog always the dog you want? And I think, you know, there's instances where you want the cold-nosed dog that can work out an older track and keeps their nose down. But in some instances, maybe you don't want a dog that's finding day-old tracks. Maybe you only want a hot-nosed dog that's finding fresher tracks. And I think the definition of what's hot and cold varies depending on who I've talked to. But
we have this conversation in our group a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's a good topic because, I mean, I've got some guys that, oh, there's plenty of bear. I don't need a cold-nosed dog. Okay, and I agree with that to a certain extent. You know, August and September when we're riding the roads and, you know, we're popping 2 or 3 bear a day, you absolutely do not need it.
Mm-hmm.
But in this December, we were very fortunate, or last December, we were very fortunate. The food, we found a very good food crop where we were hunting. And again, sometimes we were treeing 2 and 3 bear a day. I mean, maybe 1 day or 2 days, we did not tree bear out of all the days we hunted. And so when the population is good and the food sources are good, yes, I can say that maybe I don't need it. But for me personally, I want my dog to take a track as it comes. And what that means is, you know, if I'm on foot and I'm putting in the boot leather, you know, and my dog comes across the track, I would prefer him to go ahead, him or her, whichever, you know, whatever dog it is, to go ahead and go work that track out. Because to me, that is one of the, again, way back when I started, you know, I hunted with an old dog named Homer that Lance had, and Homer is kind of the foundation of some of the dogs that I still have. You know, Homer, man, I mean, we just don't have, I haven't hunted with a dog like that in years, and that's kind of like the what it's about to me. Yes, it's fun to dump dogs on hot tracks and run, and you know, you're walking out the ridge top, and your dogs throw their head in the air, and the next thing you know, they're 200 yards over the ridge, you know, and they're just driving a track. I love it, but sometimes in December, it's hard, it's slim pickings. So I do think you're right. I do think that it's personal preference, and I think that, you know, it depends on the area you hunt, the type of terrain you hunt, and how you hunt. So
I know for me, I like to watch a dog. I just think it's beautiful when you know, you can almost see them kind of squinting and just taking in, like you said, the picture that's on the ground. You know, it's exciting and I think about the human tracking dogs I've trained. I think it's also good information when you've got a dog that will work nose down, and then you see them pick their head up and their body language change. You know, you're getting closer. You know, this is when you're on the end of a leash with a dog, but, you know, I made a lot of mistakes with my first tracking dog, who actually turned into a phenomenal tracker. But, you know, talking about what makes a hot versus cold nosed dog, I started off training her by doing runaways and letting her get, you know, her prey drive stimulated and watching people run away. And she was a great hot tracker. She could run down a trail and, you know, hit a big pool of odor, and that track went across a field, you know, a low cut field, or was aged too long. She couldn't do it, and I had to back up and retrain her. And she went from being a dog that couldn't follow an older track, and you would say like, she's not a good cold tracking dog, to a dog that was great at it because I adjusted my training method. So I think to relate that to hounds, you know, I think if you're only running hot tracks, You're going to develop a dog that doesn't know how to put its nose down and work the ground scent. And scent changes. There's a great book. It's not a very long book. It's called Scent and the Scenting Dog by William Sirtuck.
Yep.
And he talks about how the scent picture changes over time. And it's talking about humans, but I have to imagine it coincides with what happens with animal odor, where the odor in the air from a fresh target odor, from a fresh animal being in that area is different than the odor that remains on the ground after they've walked through, and the ground odor changes whether it's an hour or 6 hours or 12 hours. So you can't train a dog on one piece of that picture and expect it to be good at all of them. Some are just naturally good at understanding how to use their nose in different contexts. But I think, allowing them to learn and to run behind experienced dogs and learn how to read and view the scent picture at different times helps develop the dog to the extent that their genetics will allow.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, if you're just, and I'll take the police canine, I mean, due to training, time constraints, and the amount of dogs that I have in the group, we typically don't run over an hour-long track. That's kind of our setup. That's our certification. And if we're working, I mean, we're usually on scene, 15 or 20 minutes at the most. We do have one dog, the Hanovhound, the Hanoverian hound, that now he'll run older tracks. But our dogs will do the same things his will, but we just don't practice it. So they can't call me on a missing, kid 6 hours later. Like when they call me and give me that call, I'm gonna go, yeah, I mean, I can come out and try it, but we need to call this person first because this is what they do. But yeah, I think that's a good analogy. And I think that every houndsman knows that if you're running hot tracks 99% of the time, then your dogs are going to run hot tracks because they're catching. It's exciting. It's fun for them. And if you're not running the old tracks and having some failures in there, the dog's probably not going to be interested, and vice versa. So, So is there anything else with the neuroscience, the nose of the dog, that is relevant to us, will help us become better houndsmen? Anything that you can think of?
I would say, just kind of as a general observation, when you're talking about a dog following odor, I think sometimes we expect like the dog should just take off in a beeline in the right direction. We saw that bear run. Why isn't the dog following its track exactly? The things I've explained about how the nose works and how they're getting different odor information through each nostril. And, they kind of want to find the edges of the scent plume. So like I grew up in an Italian family, and we're always cooking with garlic. So you'd walk in the house and the whole house would smell like garlic. And, imagine the dog is dumped out on a hot track and the whole area around the truck smells like a bear. Sometimes they might have to go off in the wrong direction to find kind of where that odor plume, where the edge is. And then they can say, okay, I'm out of the odor. Let me get back in it. So maybe just like managing our expectations for the dogs, understanding that they're seeing so much information through their nose. And, as long as the dog is working and you can see them processing the information and trying to work that odor, you have to let them learn and experience the world in order to know how to say like, oh, I smelled a little stronger out of this nostril, so that means the track went this way. And they're going to make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to go the wrong way in order to learn how to follow the track and go the right way. So I know that's pretty general, but I think kind of my takeaway from it is, that their nose is so complex that we have to do our best to facilitate them using it, and give them good experiences, and then kind of stay out of their way and let them learn.
Yeah. Well, I like, to sum this up, I really like that, with the younger dogs, we want a positive association. And you and I both know through our other types of training that how important that is in the development of the dog. So if you can find that odor and associate it, and that was another question I was going to get back to you, and I won't ask you no more.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm using food to do my recall on my tone, and I'm using food to do the association, you put the odor out, the dog smells it, you drop food in. What would you say to somebody that says, okay, we're using food for everything, so how is this not affecting them? Like, are we overdoing the food?
Well, my answer to that is the dog has to eat. So I use meal times as training exercises. I don't want to overfeed them. I don't want them to be dependent on, always getting extra treats for stuff. But if they're going to eat anyway, I can go throw their, 1 or 2 cups of kibble out in the yard and let them search for it. I can put the bowl down and let them run over to the bowl with the odor in it and dump their food in it. And it's not, they're going to eat anyway. They're making associations whether we want them to or not. So why not facilitate the associations we want them to make? I'm going to be feeding them out of something. Why not feed them out of a bowl that sometimes has the odor in it that I want them to find, or, let them eat off the ground and let them practice searching. That's probably one of the things I do the most is just, yep. And also it's easy to do when I have to get ready for work and I can set up a pen and sprinkle some kibble on the ground and put the puppy in there and they can have a little training session, quote unquote, mm-hmm. while I'm doing something else. So, I think a lot of people are averse to like, oh, I don't always want to have to be giving the dog treats and food. No. Well, you feed your dog.
That's right.
So, if you're going to feed them, they're learning something when you feed them, whether it's, the sound of the scooping up their food bowl into the bowl, or you walking to the kennel. I actually was listening to another one of the Houndsman XP podcasts with George Perryman. Mm-hmm. And he said he would honk the horn and then feed his dogs to teach them to come back to the sound of the horn in the woods. So, yep. I mean, all of those are just great ways to.
And it doesn't take that much time. Like, 15 minutes a day. I mean, once you figure out what you're doing and, to back up, to reiterate what you just said, the dog's got to have 3 things to survive: food, air, and water. And if you're taking that food, and that's what I don't give my dogs treats. I use the food. The food's what I use in the context, mm-hmm. And I use it in a lot of different contexts too. I mean, I literally trained my shepherd. His reward was food reward on detection. Mm-hmm. I used Dave Croyer's method, and it was a kind of an experimental thing for me. And I could literally put food in 3 other boxes and put the odor in one box, and he would go to the odor. And the guys that were with me were like, I don't get it. You're feeding him food. I'm like, food don't mean nothing without odor.
Yep. They learn that association has to be there in order for the food to be available.
Yep. And so, no, you can't. And I was being a devil's advocate there. You can't overdo it. I don't think. Like I said, I don't do it as treats. I know you don't do it as treats. It's got a purpose behind it. And, I can use the food a lot through that dog's life and through the training. And, like I said, dogs, most hounds especially are food addicts anyway. And you can pretty much get them to do anything you want with food. So that's a good way to use it.
It's super handy.
Yep. All right, Ariel, before we wrap this up, is there anything you want to add, take away, anything you want to say?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot tonight. You know, I love that you've given me the opportunity to talk about some of the nerdy stuff, and I hope I made it palatable. And you know, didn't get too overly scientific, but I really appreciate the opportunity. I would love to answer any questions if questions come up in any of the Facebook groups. It's super interesting. I'm glad we got to talk about this.
Would you mind if you're on Facebook under your name? Her name will be in the show notes. Is it okay if people would contact you if they have questions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I love talking about dogs, and you know, it might take me a little while to get back just because I'm not always great about answering my messages, but I'm really interested in olfaction detection and learning more about hound hunting. And certainly I'd love if people want to share their knowledge and experiences with me, because I am still learning. Very much so.
Well, I think we all are. I mean, again, it's a process and it's a journey. I mean, I'm nowhere near the end of mine. I want to continue to learn and, you know, have better dogs and breed better dogs. And, so no, but well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time that you have to talk to us and share your knowledge, because, it's very extensive in the dog world, with the stuff that you've done, that you've been associated with, the places that you've worked. And I know some of our listeners don't know who Jerry Bradshaw is and who Mike Settle is, and, you know, Cameron Ford and all the places that you've been and the things that you've done. But me coming from that world where, you know, these guys' names are always at the top, you know, I value your knowledge, and I hope the listeners value it. And again, we thank you for coming on and sharing that with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate you always being willing to share your knowledge with me.
Yep. All right, Ariel. So I'm thankful and glad that you have helped us find a way to teach, train, or learn.